I have this on recording now. I'm just going to leave it on recording for the whole time.
I'll try not to make any funny noises.
Just a moment. Oh dear.
So you say that you teach European history here?
Yes.
Okay. So, do you know much about American history in that time frame?
Well, I lived through it.
Well, that's fair.
I was born in 1948. I was a young teenager during the civil rights movement period in the early 1960s, and very sympathetic to the movement, but I could not call myself a participant in it.
Where did you live during that time?
In the early 1960s, my family lived in Southern California.
What was the mood surrounding the movement in Southern California?
To be honest, I couldn't really tell you. I never participated in a demonstration, and I don't remember the topic even came up very much in our school. But my parents were liberals and were supportive of the civil rights movement. We watched the news on TV. I knew that they strongly favored rights for black people. It did seem to be something that was happening in the South and not where we were in California.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever hear mention of Jewish people in regard to the civil rights movement?
Yes, my family is Jewish. We knew that young Jews were going to the South to participate in civil rights organizing activities. We certainly knew that of the three civil rights workers who were killed in Mississippi in 1964, two of them were Jewish. I couldn't say how aware I was at the time. You've got to remember that in the 1960s, all the things that we talk about in connection with women's rights and the women's movement had not taken place yet. It was considered absolutely normal and natural that the civil rights movement, the public leaders of it were mostly men, Martin Luther King and people like that, and among the Jewish activists who went to the South, the ones who got the most publicity were men also. Now there were women who went. There's a woman named Viola Luzzatto, a Jewish volunteer who was killed in Mississippi, and we remember her along with the two male Jewish students who were killed that year. But they got less publicity than the men who got involved. I wish I could tell you about the role of Jewish women's organizations, but I wasn't aware of it. It's not something I've studied particularly.
Do you feel that there was any notable difference between men and women when thinking about going south for the civil rights movement?
There's no question, I think, that when it was an issue of recruiting people to go and risk being beaten up and arrested in the South, there was a feeling that that's for the boys, and the women should not be exposed to this kind of thing. But some of them did go, and as I say, one even got killed.
Did that feeling that was more of something, a thing for boys, make it harder for women to choose to go south?
I would imagine it did. I couldn't say. I've never been in a position to ask people. but I would imagine, among other things, that their families would have been much more opposed to letting a teenage girl do this than a teenage boy.
Did it result in particularly different jobs between the men and women who participated?
Yeah, you look at the pictures, the men are always the ones in front of the microphones and the ones writing statements and manifestos and so on, and the women were usually in sort of supporting roles, making sandwiches and doing the things that needed to be done behind the scenes.
So do you feel that behind the scenes nature of their work may contribute to why they're not always as recognized?
Oh, yeah, unquestionably, sure.
Beyond just the fact that it was behind the scenes work, are there any inherently gender-related reasons that they may not be as recognized when viewing the civil rights movement?
Historians, too, have taken a long time to learn to recognize where women have played an important role in movements. There's no question that women were involved in the civil rights movement, black women and also white women supporters. But as I say, at the time, there was primarily the men who were on the posters up front. Not always, of course. Rosa Parks, for example, is a key figure in the civil rights movement. But she was usually understood as this kind of ordinary woman who just decided one day she wasn't going to go sit in the back of the bus. Actually, she was a long-time activist who had been involved in civil rights efforts for 10 years before that, and she knew very well what she was doing, among other things, that a woman being arrested would get more publicity than a man.
So one of the things we also found in our research is that the women, white women and Jewish women, tended to be able to cooperate and collaborate with black Southern women more easily than the men who were in charge of groups. So one is, why do you think that is? And maybe also, how do you think that affected the movement?
Well, it's hard for me to say because I don't know much about the facts. There is a kind of stereotype that women are better at networking and collaborating and cooperating and less likely to fight among each other about who gets recognized as being in charge. And maybe that was borne out in some genders. But I'm just not a good resource person for that.